All right, welcome to the second lecture for BSAD 490. Unfortunately, we had to do one more here where we are remote, but we'll make do as best we can. Um, you may have noticed I actually have a fairly decent setup at home here. I might have put somewhere in my example bio. I'm a hobby music producer, so I actually have a bit of good opportunity to use some vocal processing and noise reduction here in a really noisy apartment, although I'm not sure Zoom is very high fidelity. But I hope everyone has been able to stay warm and stay safe. Nice to have the lockdowns here removed in Lafourche and get out to the store and go to the gym and all that good stuff. We're going to finish off our chapter one of the textbook today. Um, there's still 40 slides left to go here, so I'm going to be moving at a pretty good clip. It's tricky with the online recordings because I don't know that they make for terribly engaging lectures, especially when they start to stretch out to an hour, 20 minutes, that kind of thing. But we'll move quickly and questions are welcome. I think I am correct in saying I posted my cell number to the Canvas if you need something from me. I tend to give it out first day of class, but we didn't really have one. So you are always welcome to contact me via cell, email, whatever you like. Email's fine. I'm really on top of my inbox. But sometimes um, if it's something urgent, and it doesn't need to be life or death, but just you're working on that assignment, it's due the next day, you are welcome to text me with the caveat that I may or may not be able to answer. I do the best I can. I prioritize answering student communications, but sometimes I'm just have something else on or I'm out at another commitment. But you are always welcome to text me. Doesn't matter the time of day. I'm a late at night person. And when I go to bed, I just turn my phone on silent. So text, email, whatever you like, anytime. It's all good. And I will always get back to you when I'm able. Good. All right. So social responsibility. This is where we left off. We're still talking about trends in the strategy landscape that companies have to deal with and that as managers you will have to deal with. So we're looking at technological change, what's considered to be a very fast pace of technological change. Um, I guess it's kind of fast compared to what? If you were born in 1890, you probably went from saw a horse and buggy all the way up to landing on the moon. So I guess speed of technological change is relative. I think we're always living. It always feels like it's moving fast for us, but um, it's always something you need to be adapting to. Corporate social responsibility. This is an interesting one. Um, Sometimes you hear different terms bandied about and used um, interchangeably, social responsibility and sustainability. They're not necessarily the same thing. Sustainability, you might say, is fairly specific to do with the use of resources. And then sometimes that gets mixed up with environmental efforts, but not necessarily the same thing. If you are in the forestry industry, you should be concerned about the sustainability of your resource because your business depends on it. Just ask any former cod fisherman from the east coast of Canada or kind of Maine area there. Those cod fisheries and what used to be the greatest cod fishery in the world, those are gone or they might be coming back slowly, but for decades they were overfished and they're gone. So that is a sustainability problem. Corporate social responsibility. It says here it's society holding corporations and other businesses accountable for their actions with regard to a number of societal expectations. And there's a list of them there. I got to admit, I struggle somewhat um, with this term, corporate social responsibility. I think it lacks a good definition, and people use it to mean very different things. If you are doing activity that's illegal um, or against government policy, that is. I'm a political science student, and I would have said the way that we deal with these problems is through democratic institutions like legislation and legislators and voting. Um, recently there's a lot of talk about being a good corporate citizen, and that tends to refer to going beyond. Generally speaking, corporate social responsibility is referring to acts that go beyond legal requirements. Um, and I think there's some reevaluation of how far that should go. It's always been somewhat controversial. Um, I will put my cards on the table here and say that I lean towards the libertarian side of economics and politics. So that kind of looks more like Milton Friedman's idea, which is just, obey the laws and stick to your knitting. But there are certainly instances where it is strategic to, and we'll get a bit into this as well when we start talking about stakeholder management, which again isn't the same thing as social responsibility. But you should know what the term corporate social responsibility is. You'll sometimes simply hear it referred to as CSR. That's what that acronym stands for, corporate social responsibility. And it can just include, it's kind of a junk drawer term that can mean all sorts of different things, some of which maybe fall better in another um, drawer, another category like sustainability or employee relations or corporate relations. Um, but we'll talk more about this as we go along. Um, It's talking about sustainability here, right? This idea that's really just common sense. You shouldn't destroy resources that you depend on for survival. I come from Alberta, um, which is oil country, kind of very similar to Louisiana and Texas in a way. And Alberta firms have often been concerned about sustainability of the resource we rely on up there, which is oil. It's a limited resource. Um, and also, when we get into stakeholder management, we'll talk about the impact on local communities. If you are dumping nuclear waste into the river, you are probably going to lose your ability to operate in that community. You will not be welcome there, which comes into stakeholder management. Um, there is this idea that large firms can be held accountable for the actions of the firms with which they do business. You see this come up. Again, I'm somewhat cynical here, so I know back in Alberta, a lot of companies were pulling out of the oil patch. The big global bank HSBC said we're not going to invest in dirty Canadian oil. Um, that's another discussion about how dirty it is. That Alberta producers are pretty on top of things technologically and in terms of emissions. So there's talk about, well, this is unethical, so we're going to hold these firms accountable. At the same time, we all have smartphones that probably had Chinese slave labor in the supply chain. So do we really hold these firms accountable? Well, we do when we feel like it, and it doesn't. If I might cynically say, we hold them accountable when we don't think it will cost us anything. If we have to give up having nice iPhones for under $1,000, then we're a bit more flexible with how much we hold these firms accountable. ESG does get reported on. There are, I can't remember which databases have this kind of information. It tends to be larger companies who can afford to report on this kind of stuff, or firms that exist that are operating in countries where they're forced to report on ESG, another acronym, environment, society, and governance, gets mixed up with CSR, gets mixed up with sustainability. Greenwashing is a term that's used disparagingly to talk about firms that may be, they're dumping toxic waste in the Mississippi, but then they plant a few trees or something like that. That would be an example of greenwashing, where you're exaggerating your firm's environmental actions, positive actions. I'll leave you guys here to look at these polling activities. They're not very interesting to conduct online asynchronously. Cool. All right. Now we're going to start digging into some actual strategy topics here and different models or approaches to business strategy. As I said last week, we're going to have sort of an external model, an internal model, and then a relationship model. So 3 models that we're going to use and look at as we structure this course, and they correspond to models that you will use to analyze and provide strategy and strategic recommendations, rather, for your assignment, on which more later. So the IO model or the industrial organization model is, and it doesn't mention this here, but it should, is very much associated with a famous Harvard professor, almost kind of a celebrity professor back in the day called Michael Porter. You might have heard of something called Porter's Five Forces in your marketing class. We're going to use that tool here as well. And Porter basically said, well, if we're trying to earn above average returns, the trick or the secret is to find an industry that has great profit potential. So what you need to do if you want to make above average returns is you need to analyze the industry. And then based on that, if you understand how that industry is organized, you can enter that industry and make above average returns. Kind of problematic for some reasons, but still that we'll get into, but still useful because there are very different average profitabilities between industries. The tobacco industry, even though it's in decline, is extremely profitable on average. The airline industry tends to, I think the average profitability is actually negative. So Porter noticed this, that these different industries have very different average profitability rates, average rates of profit, and said, well, what is it that determines whether or not an industry is profitable? If we can figure that out, we can analyze the industry and then invest profitably. Now, of course, one of the big problems here is that it sort of treats strategy as more of an investment decision than a business management decision. It assumes that you maybe are on the outside making a decision about whether or not to enter an industry in the first place. If you're already there and it's a low profit industry, well, maybe it tells you you should leave, but I think we'd all agree there's more at stake there. We enter industries oftentimes. A person who starts their own business doesn't always start their own business because they've done an analysis of every business out there and determined it's the most profitable, although they might, absolutely. I mean, I knew a guy who did sewer cleaning, and that's exactly why he chose that industry. He wasn't passionate about cleaning sewers, but he saw an opportunity and went for it. On the other hand, I would say that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, guys like Elon Musk, who we'll talk about a lot in this course, and Steve Jobs, who enter an industry because it's something they're passionate about. They have a vision, something about that industry excites them. So there's more to it than just analyzing the industry and deciding which one's the best. But it can still tell us a lot about the industry and is useful as investors or even as managers within an industry, understanding the dynamics of that industry so that we can make the best decisions to mitigate forces that would depress profits and hopefully encourage processes that would increase profits. So let's talk about that. Here's some of the factors. These are basically factors that determine the structure of the industry, drivers of profitability, you might say. Economies of scale, barriers to market entry, diversification, product differentiation, the degree of concentration in the industry, and market frictions. This is just a really high-level overview, so I'm not going to dive in very deep right now because we're still really in an intro lecture here in Chapter 1. But it gives you an outline of where we'll go as these lectures continue. Assumptions of the IO or industrial organization model is that the external environment should determine the strategies that will give you above average returns, kind of like we were just talking about. It assumes that firms in the same industry will generally want to have the same strategy. It assumes that they have access to the same important resources. Kind of once you're in there, and this is the problem, is it kind of views firms in the same industry as a bit of a homogenous group, which isn't the case at all. It's like saying that everyone who competes in the NFL is a sort of generic NFL player. Obviously, there's players in the NFL that have very different talents, very different niches, and very different styles and strategies. It assumes that resources are highly mobile. So even if you were different when you come into the industry, those differences kind of are eroded and you all end up converging into the same strategies and same bank of resources. And it also sees the managers as in a kind of a classical, this model sort of develops from classical economics, which you might remember from your econ course, this idea that we can predict the behavior of managers by assuming they are rational individuals committed to the firm's best interests. That is problematic because although they might be I would agree that it's generally useful to assume that individuals will behave rationally. Doesn't mean they do, but if we're trying to predict behavior, rational behavior tends to be the best behavior to assume. It's reasonable to assume that if you leave $100 on the ground, someone will pick it up. That will be right more times than not. But the problem with this statement here, and hopefully you can see, oh, no, I can't highlight it. Let's go back here. Maybe I can get my little annotation pencil. Let's see if this works. Oops. The problem with this statement here, oh, that's pretty ugly, is this idea that they're going to operate the rational, but are they going to operate in the firm's best interest? It'd be nice if they did, but we run into something called agency problems. This idea that the interests of the owner or the principal, as it's called in this theory, the principal is the owner of the firm, and the interests of his agent, the manager who runs the firm for him or her, are not necessarily completely aligned. The manager wants a good salary, company car, good benefits, and a pension, and wants to spend as much, in theory, wants to spend as much of the company's money on himself or herself as he is able to. Whereas the owner would prefer that the manager spend nothing on himself or herself and manage it as efficiently as possible in the interests of the owner. So that's what is problematic with this assumption here, this fourth assumption. Tools that are used and that we're going to explore in this IO model, the five forces model of returns, Porter's five forces, I'll be calling it. That's how it's known, is Porter's five forces. Michael Porter came up with it. And it's a way to analyze the potential profitability of the industry, as well as, like I said, find ways to maybe manage those forces. The five forces, there's five. What they are is the power of suppliers, bargaining power of suppliers. Are our suppliers able to hold us over a barrel and take all the potential profits that we make, or do we have a bargaining advantage? If our supplier is NVIDIA, there's a good chance they're going to be at an advantage there. And we'll talk about reasons why. They're a monopoly in a sense in terms of high quality chips. So if we want NVIDIA chips in our computers, they're probably going to have an advantage over us. Do our buyers have an advantage or do we have an advantage? Are we in a large pool of sellers with only one buyer and we're all bidding kind of a race to the bottom to get that buyer's business? In that case, they have the advantage. Or are we the monopolist? Are we the only provider, in which case we have the advantage? More on this in future lecture. Competitive rivalry amongst firms. Are there lots of firms competing quite intensively, or are there only a couple firms and they're kind of regionally dispersed, each with their, or dispersed in the product, what you might call the product space? I sell this kind of product. It's a little bit different from your product. We each have our own carved out niche, and the competition is low for that reason. How intense is that rivalry? Are there substitute products? What would be an example there? Easiest example is that always comes up is coffee and tea. In my opinion, I'm drinking coffee right now. Tea is not a substitute product for coffee, but for a lot of people, it is a viable substitute. And if coffee gets too expensive, they could switch to a viable substitute, maybe an energy drink or something like that. And potential entrants to the industry. Are there barriers to entering our industry? If somebody sees that we're making cash hand over fist, can they just jump in and start offering the same service and steal our lunch, if you like? Easy example, and there are reasonable barriers to entry that are enforced legally. You can't just open up a doctor's office so that you can charge people $100 a visit without any qualifications. But at the same time, there are aspects of the American Medical Association that do exist to regulate the number of doctors coming out there. I don't know if they'd want to say that's what they're doing, but Adam Smith famously said something like, two people in the same trade never get together except to conspire to raise prices. So that's famous way that we can protect ourselves from potential entrants is either to lobby a politician to close off the industry and protect us, put tariffs on stuff, or we can collude to keep people out. Or there are other more neutral things. If it's a capital intensive industry, that's a barrier to entry as well. I can't just go and enter the I don't know, American automobile manufacturing industry with $10 and a dream, right? I'm going to need, in order to be competitive, I need to be operating at a scale that makes the vehicles affordable compared to my competitors. So the conclusions here, oh, and in terms of so we've got this this idea over here. So this five forces model is our analysis tool. And then it kind of, then we also have two types of strategy, what we call cost leadership strategy. Are we going to compete based on cost, in which case we have to keep our costs down so we can provide the lowest cost goods to our customers? Or are we going to differentiate our products? Are we going to sell, what would be a good example of this? Walmart, perfect example of a cost leadership strategy. Walmart, low prices, everyday low prices, right? That's a pretty good giveaway. Nordstrom would be an example more of a differentiated strategy. Saks Fifth Avenue, right? You walk in, somebody opens the door for you. If you've ever been to, I used to live in London, and they had a famous old department store there called Harrods. There's a doorman who's dressed in a tuxedo who opens the door. I couldn't buy anything there, but you go in. It was the only Krispy Kreme store in London, so I'd go in there and have the doorman open it for me and order my donut. But a shopping experience where you pay a premium to get something nice, to get something that creates extra value for you. I use an Apple Mac, which is more expensive because it has differentiated features related to music production that I like and I'm willing to pay more for, instead of maybe just having a generic Acer or Chromebook or something that would be the lowest cost. Important to remember, and we're going to talk about this more when we talk about the resource-based view, manager strategic actions in this model do affect the firm's performance. Whether or not the IO model acknowledges that, what managers do matters. Just look at what happened to the last CEO of, or the CEO of Intel here is in a lot of hot water. I know there's some other CEOs that are in the news lately and have been sort of shuffled off. Starbucks just got a new CEO that I think added $32 billion to the stock value of that firm. So obviously the market thought he was worth a lot of money to that, to Starbucks. And interestingly, I don't think he got a $32 million bonus. So that is a case where the money went to the principal. It boosted the stock of the owners rather than the salary of the CEO of Starbucks. I'll see if I can find that article. It's pretty interesting about when they hired him. All right. Oops. Back one. I just love how Zoom doesn't erase your lines when you move between slides. Good. So here's sort of the process diagram of using this IO model. Analyze the external environment, especially the industry environment. I'm gonna show you guys when we get in class, it's a bit easier on the board, but basically I approach strategy with sort of this concentric circles. You have the firm here. This is the company, everything that's within the boundaries of this legally incorporated entity called a firm. Then you have the industry. I'm not going to spell the whole word because that'll be awful with my mouse. The industry is this next circle, and then the external environment is this outer circle here. And that's kind of everything going on around our industry that affects a lot of industries potentially. Geopolitical factors, exchange rates, those sorts of things. So more on that later. Anyways, the IO model, analyze the industry, the external environment, but especially the industry environment. Find an attractive industry, formulate a strategy, develop whatever assets or resources you need to succeed. We'll talk a bit about something called key success factors in an industry, and then implement your strategy, and hopefully that all leads to this wonderful thing called above average returns. Oops. Eraser on. There we go. All right, next one, the resource-based model or view. I might call it the resource-based view. Sometimes it's often just simply called RBV or resource-based view versus IO model. And basically the resource-based view, a guy called Jay Barney, who I think was at Brigham Young University, and actually really couldn't get a hearing for his theory, funnily enough, until he was the editor of a special issue. And so he published his article that he couldn't get published until he was the editor. Kind of little bit of humor there for people in my discipline. It's kind of funny that he had to wait until he was the editor to publish his own paper, which became enormously successful. And he said, well, all well and good that industries have very different average rates of profitability, but actually the difference within the industry tends to be larger than the difference between industries, meaning that I can't remember exactly what the numbers are. It's in the textbook, I think, but industry explains something like 20% of the profitability of a firm, and the resources explain more than that, maybe 30%. I don't know. Don't quote me on the number, but it was found that the resources, the things that are unique to the firm within the industry are even more determinative than things that are unique to the industry itself. Industry itself still has good explanatory power. 20% is huge in the social sciences. If you can explain 20% of something in social sciences, you're going to get a Nobel Prize kind of idea. But he said, look, there's something else going on here, because even in a supposedly unprofitable industry, you have firms that are killing it, that are making a ton of profit, and firms that are doing, and in very profitable industries, you have firms that are going out of business. So what's going on here? We don't want to be average, we want to be above average. And he says, well, the thing here is the resources of the firm. Those are unique. And that encompasses things like processes, knowledge, know-how, financial resources. We'll talk about all these when we look at this model in a couple of weeks. Technological patents, finances, people, human resources, right? That weird term we use that kind of talks about people as if they were logs or bricks, but important resource for the firm. And he would say these are unique to each firm. An imperfect example would be like saying that Travis Kelce has a different set of resources than another quarterback in the NFL. Just because they're both in the NFL and they're quarterbacks doesn't mean they perform the same. And some have very unique resources that give them a competitive advantage, a word we'll use a lot in this course, competitive advantage. Three broad classes of resources: physical capital, human capital, and organizational capital. Physical capital is basically everything you can see on the balance sheet. We'll talk about that more later. Human capital is a bit more tricky to measure. You can have a head count, but how valuable is that human capital? There are ways we try and measure it: productivity, salaries, stuff like that. And then organizational capital would refer to things maybe like routines, processes, knowledge that's embedded in the organization itself. Kind of mixes a bit with human capital there. Sorry, I just need to put mute my notifications here if I can figure out how to do that, because my stuff is beeping off and you might all be hearing it. There we go. Focus. Good idea. All right. Within resources, or in addition to resources, I guess you might say, we talk about capabilities and core competencies. So a resource is what you have. A capability is what you can do with it. I might have access to a lot of capital, or let's say on a more personal level, I might own a $5,000 Gibson Les Paul guitar. That's great. That's a great resource. If I can't play that guitar, it's not going to create much value. If a company has a big factory, this actually happens quite a lot when say, a Chinese firm or any firm buys a patent or buys a company that has trying to acquire patents that company owns. If they don't have the knowledge and the human resources to use that knowledge that they've acquired or those patents they've acquired, it's not going to create extra value for them. A core competency is a capability that is the source of a competitive advantage. So you might have a capability in accounting, but that might be just necessary to stay in the game, sort of what we'd call table stakes, right? Table stakes when you're at a casino is how much does it cost just to sit at the table? It doesn't mean you're going to win. You need it just to get in the game, right? So core competencies are the ones that get us a competitive advantage. It's the thing we're good at that helps us outperform, hopefully, rival firms. So here's the RBV, or resource-based view model. Let's analyze the resources. We're going to do this as well. Let's analyze our capabilities. What are we able to do better than our competitors? Which of these capabilities are really kind of, if we were to boil them down, do any of these give us a competitive advantage? Okay, now let's find that attractive industry with reference to those capabilities. I might be an excellent basketball player, but that only matters if I'm playing basketball. Um, Formulate strategy to get these above average returns. And then, as always, this reminds me of that South Park episode with the gnomes who would had their business plan and they didn't know what the second step was, but the third step was make profit. Our models here always end with superior returns. All right. This is a really useful, and I'll get you guys to do. This is sometimes called a VRIN or a VRIO. In this case, it's VRCN analysis. You'll see it spelt in different ways depending on how they do the acronym. Um, I'm fine with this one, VRCN. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue. You can't say VRIN or VRIO. But basically, the idea is that resources and capabilities can only give you a competitive advantage under the following condition. A, it has to be valuable. What do we mean by that? Somebody has to be willing. We have no other reference for value in this class except that somebody's willing to pay something for it. When we say value, we mean somebody wants to pay for it. I might think that my favorite t-shirt that I bought 20 years ago is very valuable, but if nobody else is willing to pay it, it's not creating value that I can sell, right? I might pay for it, in which case there is value, but stuff doesn't have value until someone's willing to pay for it for the purposes of this course. Has to be rare. That's kind of tied up with valuable, but basically, if everyone has it, we're not going to be able to charge much of a premium for it. That's why there are certain industries, if people enjoy doing something, it tends not to pay very well. Being a comedian or being a musician, you might be a really good musician. You might, but it's only that sort of top 1 in a million, very rare levels of talent that are able to capitalize on that. It has to be costly to imitate. If someone can buy the resource relatively cheaply, you're not going to have much of an advantage. If there's a resource that creates a lot of value and I can just go buy it relatively cheaply, it's going to add competition and going to lower the prices. And it has to be non-substitutable. Back to that one of Porter's 5 forces. If there's another product that'll do the same job and compete with my product, that's going to cause a problem for the value of this resource or capability in giving superior returns. Um, And as it says here, it's difficult to obtain and sustain a competitive advantage based on resources alone. You tend to need to have some skill, something unique to yourself or your firm, a capability, if you want a sustained competitive advantage. Because any resource you have access to, unless you're able to somehow get a monopoly on it, which tends to be illegal in the USA or just not possible, you're not going to be able to sustain that advantage. Even if you can have a legal monopoly on something like a patent for a drug or a piece of technology, somebody's going to see the profits you make from having that resource and try to develop a substitute for it or a better version of it. So nobody gets to really just sit around on their laurels and collect money from resources, maybe unless you own a ton of land or trying to think. Mineral rights in Canada, that's a big one. I think it's a bit different here in Canada. The government owns access to the minerals under most of the land, but if you have mineral rights and they're limited, then you can kind of just sit back and collect paychecks the rest of your life. Good work if you can get it. Unfortunately, not many of us have that. All right, stakeholder model. This is one that's actually, I think, misunderstood a lot. If you've never heard of it, maybe this is a debate that you're just like, I've never even heard of it. I didn't know this was controversial. This is one where I think sort of quote unquote conservatives sometimes get the wrong end of the stick, economic conservatives or political conservatives. They see stakeholder model and they think, oh, this means being forced to do a bunch of stuff we don't want to do, which I'd say is more corporate social responsibility. The stakeholder model really, when it was first written about, and I've actually have a photo of myself with the guy who wrote about it, really interesting character. R. Edward Freeman is his name. The idea there is that it actually it kind of assumes some of the things from the resource-based model, but it says those resources that you might need for your firm to conduct business exist in the environment and may be owned um, by other actors in your environment. Perfect example would be capital. Shareholders are a stakeholder. It's not this idea that stakeholder model is opposed to a shareholder model just isn't accurate. It expands that slightly wider in a way that I would say is realistic. It says, look, of course we have to please our shareholders. They're probably the number one, besides maybe the government, which is another stakeholder. The shareholder is the most important stakeholder. But there are other stakeholders that matter, and if we don't manage them properly, we're not going to be able to get the resources we need. A great example would be employees. If we treat our employees poorly, if we don't manage our relationships with our employees, no one will want to work for us, especially in a competitive environment. We need resources that our employees have, namely labor, intellectual skill, etc. So we need to manage those relationships well. We may need resources from the government. Maybe we are and some organizations are very good at this. Farmers are very good at managing their relationships with the government. They tend to get very favorable legislation and their lobbies are very good at getting protected by the government. Customers are a stakeholder. Again, customers are a very important stakeholder. We want their money. We want them to buy our stuff. If we ignore that important stakeholder, we're going to be in trouble. Another really important one is suppliers. I used to work in banking, and that relationship with a key supplier or a key customer was often the make or break deal for a firm. If you lost a supplier that you needed for your product, or the supplier decided not to do business with you, or they raised their price precipitously, that could throw off your business and put you out of business, no question. So it is important to manage stakeholders, but it's also important to analyze which stakeholders are important. The angry person on Twitter who is upset about because you're not protesting whatever the cause of the day is, probably might not be an important stakeholder. Depends on who your customers are. If all your customers feel the same way as angry person on Twitter, maybe that could cause an issue for you. But Starbucks is kind of discovering, hey, we've been sort of kowtowing to the Twitter mob, and it turns out they weren't our most important stakeholder. Our most important stakeholder was actually all the normies who stopped buying coffee because we were focusing too much on other stuff than a good experience. And they've brought in this new CEO who's started this whole mandatory training, like back to being a coffee shop program at Starbucks. So you need to analyze your stakeholders, decide who's important, who's strategically important, and we'll look at a matrix for doing this, right? Who do we need to keep a close eye on and keep happy? Who do we just need to keep informed? Who do we just want to be sort of do whatever we can to make them leave us alone, like the government, right? We just fill out our taxes, pay our taxes, don't want the IRS coming around, so just keep your nose clean, and that stakeholder will be fine. We don't need to make them super happy. We just need to follow our obligations. There you have a list of some primary stakeholders, all important, right? If you tick off the community, my mother-in-law was actually really good at this. A big heavy machinery yard opened up next to her house in the town she lived in and was running all night, and she got on the warpath with the local councillor and eventually got them kicked out. She said, I don't like all this noise in my backyard of my nice little quiet town. So they did not do a very good job of pleasing that stakeholder. If it is communities and people can take action, it doesn't mean they're out there throwing bricks through your windows, although they might do that, but they might go to their local councillor or local congressman or official and say, you know what, I don't like this. If you don't get rid of this problem, I'm not voting for you. So they can be a very important stakeholder. Financiers, the same thing. Keep your banker happy as a former banker. Secondary stakeholders, I guess we say they're not directly necessary to the value the firm creates. These are the sort of issues like angry Twitter mob. How seriously do we need to take this? Is this actually going to make a difference? If it starts lowering our stock price, maybe we do need to worry. So stakeholder-oriented management. Here's the model, right? Figure out, keyword here is we have to figure out who has a legitimate interest in what the firm does. How much do we depend on these stakeholders to achieve our objectives? Suppliers, pretty important probably, especially if there's something of a monopoly supplier. Customers, always important. Shareholders, always important. They can fire us if we're the manager. Um, and then those circles get broader and broader, maybe, of how direct their influence is on our company. Reciprocity. Um, there's this idea here that you want to develop relationships. Again, I'm as conservative as they come, but this is important. It's not just your shareholders. Um, I spent most of my time as a banker going for coffees with lawyers and potential customers and suppliers, just to keep everyone happy, because I knew if I had a good relationship with my suppliers, and that's, in this case it was often lawyers in banking, when I needed them to, they would get a deal done for me. Sometimes I needed them to waive some fees for a customer. Sometimes I needed something done overnight and they had to stay late. If I had a good relationship, I could get that resource from my supplier that I couldn't provide myself. I can't enact a legally binding contract. I needed them to do that for me. So I kept good relationships with them. Collect the information or whatever you need from the stakeholders to make a plan. Make the plan about how you're going to manage your stakeholders, and then carry out the plan. And then, as always, final step, profits, the money. In America, first you get the money, then you get the power. Whatever the rest of that quote is from Scarface, if you've seen that movie. Good. Stakeholder model of returns. Oops, I went backwards. Oh, yeah. So other ideas here, just examples where having good relationships can be a benefit. If your employees love working for you, you might not have to pay them as much. If they're miserable, you might have to pay quite a bit just to keep people from leaving you. Golden handcuffs, I've heard it called from friends who hate their job but have a good salary. If your customers are happy, they might give you a bit of leeway. They won't put that negative review. If the staff were lovely to you at the restaurant, maybe you don't leave. You don't try to nuke them on Google ratings because your eggs were burnt or something like that. So relationships matter. In fact, they changed the title of my job when I worked at a Bank of Montreal from banker to relationship manager. That's how important relationships are. Um, um, This leans more into CSR stuff, I'd say, this idea of distributional justice, but stakeholders need to feel like they're receiving value from the relationship. So, no, I guess it's not always a CSR issue, depending on how it's approached. If one of the things my boss would always say is, if I wanted deals, say from an accountant or one of my suppliers, if I wanted them to refer me customers, I had to be referring them customers. There had to be reciprocity in the relationship. They had to feel like I was treating them fairly. This was important actually with my customers, this idea of procedural justice. Um, uh, Sometimes as a banker, you have to make decisions your customers don't like. You can't give them a loan. The interest rate has to go up. You need to take more security. In the sort of worst case scenario, you have to seize security and liquidate a loan. And it's important, especially in those cases, to make customers feel like they are being treated fairly and being considered in that process. That's part of this as well here, this interactional justice. Managing for stakeholders. Yeah, doing this doesn't guarantee you above average returns. And I think that's the mistake that people make, and the mistake that some of these companies are finding out, and in a costly fashion. You can spend a lot of money on your stakeholders. Taking your suppliers and your customers out for steak dinners every night is going to really push your expense account to the red and might not actually result in any more business or any more value. So sometimes you'd be better off just having what's called an arm's length transaction, right? I don't have a specific relationship with a lawyer who I use all the time and develop a relationship with. I just go out and get out the yellow pages, to use that, or Google, and phone a bunch of lawyers and just take the best price every time. I don't bother investing in a relationship. And sometimes that's a better idea. I've actually known, I've had customers, and even in my own career, sometimes the relationship isn't serving you anymore. You love the supplier, you have a relationship with them, but they're too expensive or they screw up, and you just have to change that. You have to go back and either form a new relationship or just start doing a more sort of transactional model or arm's length transaction. Don't give away the store, as it says there. Yeah, same idea here. Don't overdo it with stakeholder management. All right, going to finish off here with vision, mission, and values. One of the things you guys will be doing in this course is analyzing a company and trying to, one of the first things you want to do is find out what its vision statement is, its mission statement, and its value statement. Doesn't necessarily have all three. It might have two, it might have one. Sometimes it has zero. But what are these things? Um, the idea here is that the firm analyzes its environment, what's going on with politics, what's going on with the government, what's going on in any international um, markets that we're in, what's going on inside the firm, what's going on in the industry, who are our stakeholders. Okay, now we have the information we need to decide on our vision, mission, and values. And these are really the big pictures. Before we can have a strategy, and this is a discussion we would have had if we'd met in class, I would say, well, what is a strategy? And usually what comes up is, well, a strategy is a means of achieving some kind of objective. Now, if we don't know what that objective is, or if we've chosen the wrong objective, so to speak, um, our strategy is no good. What are we trying to achieve? So mission, vision, and values tends to inform the goals we set for strategy in a very broad sense, what we're willing to do. If our strategy is to be the biggest um, waste disposal company in Louisiana, are we willing to go and hire uh, thugs to break the knees of our competitors? Maybe that's not part of our values, so we're going to take that off the table. Maybe we're not even willing to do things that, although legal, we don't like to do. One of our values might be to treat our staff really well. Costco is a great example of this. They're really known for treating their staff very well, paying them more than they have to, um, and and um, and that's part of their values. It's also part of stakeholder management as well. Um, so who are we and what are we trying to do really, and how are we going to go about it? Vision, mission, and values. Vision, where do we want to go? Where are we trying to get to? This is often, as it implies, sort of the visionary statement. It's some kind of probably we haven't achieved it right now. It should be aspirational, usually in some sense. Tends to be short and concise. It says it's developed by the CEXDO. That should just be CEO. I don't know what happened there on the slide. I might have accidentally entered that. Um, as well as other what you'd call C-suite managers, top-level managers. Um, and that sets maybe the long-term goal of who we want to be and what we're trying to achieve. Mission tends to be a bit more customer focused. What are we going to provide? If somebody wants to know what we're about, that's how we're going to do it. Or yeah, you could say that's how we're going to do it. It's a bit more concrete. Maybe we want to provide the best. We want to provide the best customer service, or our mission is to make Henry Ford, a car that everyone can afford, that sort of thing. Values have a um, bit more of an ethics dimension, you might say. Um, I remember at BMO, we had this at Bank of Montreal in Canada, we had this whole thing about living the values, and they were related to things like customer service, going the extra mile, working as a team, right? And those were things we were referred to in our work, and we'd be evaluated. How are you living the values? And we'd have to show that this is how we made decisions. And it is very useful. If your value is customer service and everyone knows that, then when you get to a decision that involves whether or not to provide customer service, you would lean towards the option that prioritizes that value. If you're not concerned at all with customer service, you're just concerned with serving as many people as possible, um, and if they don't like it, there's 10 more people behind them, then maybe you wouldn't make that same decision if it wasn't part of your values. All right, strategic leaders. I'm actually not going to get into this, finish these slides off because although it's interesting, I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about this in the course. So I won't give this introduction. If we get around to it, great. But I'm going to finish this lecture where we're at for now. Let me just pull up our syllabus here and just see where we're at and how we're looking. All right. So you should have seen I posted the groups on Canvas that you guys are going to be working in, the teams. Um, January 31st. Okay, so by next Friday, we'll have a bit of time to talk about this, but start thinking about it already. I want you guys, you guys are going to, if you've read the syllabus, you're going to be analyzing a company. You're going to be spending a lot of time looking at its numbers, looking at its company statements, reports, etc. So I want you to start thinking about what company you want to look at. I'm going to set a few constraints for that. It needs to be a publicly traded company. Otherwise, you won't be able to, because I want you to look at its 10K reports. Publicly traded companies are required by law to post their financials. If you're not required by law, you tend not to do that. I want it to be a company that has more than one reporting segment. We'll look at that a bit on Tuesday, but you can start looking at that now. How many reporting segments do they have? A company like Apple might have reporting segments for services, as well as mobile phones or iPhones, as well as whatever else, wearables, that kind of thing. I want multiple segments because we're going to analyze their corporate strategy as well as their business level strategy, and that's worth pointing out right now. There is a corporate level strategy. If you manage multiple lines of business, you are going to make strategic decisions about investment and divestment. If we're Apple, do we want to enter into self-driving vehicles? That's a corporate strategy decision. That's a new industry, a new line of business. A business level decision is, well, how can we sell as many Apple Watches as possible, or make as much money as possible selling them? Perhaps we don't want to sell the most. We want to make it the most prestigious or the most high sort of luxurious item. That's a business level strategy. So all that to say, I want your firm that you choose to have multiple reporting segments, multiple lines of business within a corporate portfolio. And that is due next Friday at noon. So yeah, that's it for now, I guess. Only other homework, you should all please do your bios that I've put up there. Send me your little bios. It's really helpful for me to know if you're working, what you're interested in, what companies you want to talk about. Helps me shape the course and make it tailored a bit more. Information is valuable. It tells me what you guys are interested in. And it's also just helps me put a name to a face and some interests. It adds a bit of flesh on helping me remember who you guys are and knowing a bit about you. And then the other thing, yeah, reach out to your teams. Introduce yourself to your teams. I've also put an assignment there, actually. Sorry, I almost forgot this. You guys need to come up with a team charter. I've listed how you're going to do that. You need to come up with some ground rules. This is really important and maybe worth spending a second here talking about. Working in teams can be really awesome or it can be really difficult. A lot of that depends on, of course, the team members. If it's kind of like same thing with managing people. If you have great people, you might not ever run into a problem. It just is great. Sometimes they're great people, but there's just conflicts, and that's fine. Conflicts are actually having conflict in your student groups is an opportunity because you will absolutely have conflicts in the workplace, and the way you handle those. I have received promotions because of my ability to handle conflicts. I used to manage a team of 10 people at one point, and that all started because I was able to handle difficult interpersonal interactions. I've listed some ideas there. Basically, the ground rules are to outline expectations. You need to clearly set the expectations and then set sanctions for not meeting those expectations. And part of the reason for that is somebody's going to come to me. It happens every class. I'd love for you guys to be the first that didn't, but I won't hold my breath. Somebody's going to come to me and say, I've got a problem with this group member XYZ who's not doing his or her part of the work. Can you talk to them or something? And I will say, have you gone through the ground rules? Have you gone through the sanctions? Have you talked to them first? Unless it's gross misconduct, like something that obviously just needs to be addressed right away by me, I don't want to know about it until you guys have addressed it as a group, because that's one of the greatest problems I've seen, and one of the greatest weaknesses that hampers leadership is not being able to have what I've heard called courageous. I actually took a course on this, courageous conversations. How do you have courageous conversations? How do you have unpleasant conversations with people that say, hey, when you do XYZ, it makes me feel, or it has this impact on me. We can talk a bit more about that in class if necessary, but you're going to need to come up with a way to address underperformance from your peers in your ground rules. And also, I want you to come up with mission, values, and vision. So that'll all be on Canvas. If you have any questions, just shoot me email or text or whatever. Yeah, so that should be it. Group charters and vision, mission, values, and your personal bio. If you could have those all in by the time we meet next Tuesday, that would be great. And then company decision is going to happen by Friday. So start looking at that. If you haven't already done so, reach out to your other team members. Cool. All right. Have a great weekend. Get out there and build a snowman while there's still some snow around, and we'll see you next week.